Something changed the moment Caitlin Clark stepped onto the floor wearing Team USA across her chest. For months, the conversation around Clark had been loud, messy, and incredibly divided. Some people believed she was already the future of women's basketball. Others insisted the hype had gone way too far. They said she needed time. They said the international stage would expose her. They said the spotlight was simply too big. But then the ball went up, the game began, and within minutes it became very clear that something was different, because Caitlin Clark didn't look overwhelmed. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look like someone trying to survive the moment. Instead, she looked exactly like the player millions of fans had been watching all along. And suddenly, the entire narrative started to change. Before this debut even happened, there was already an enormous cloud of skepticism hanging over Clark. Ever since her historic college run with the Iowa Hawkeyes, the expectations around her career had been almost impossible to manage. The numbers she put up were ridiculous. The crowds she drew were unprecedented, and the attention she brought to women's basketball sparked a debate that refused to go away. Some people celebrated what she represented for the sport. Others pushed back hard, arguing that she was being overhyped by media and fans who were desperate for a new superstar. That debate only intensified when Clark entered the professional level, because suddenly the question was no longer about potential. Now it was about proof. Critics kept asking the same thing. Could her style actually translate to the highest levels of basketball? Her game had always been bold and aggressive. She took shots most players wouldn't even consider. She made passes that looked impossible until they somehow reached their target. And while that style made her one of the most exciting players anyone had ever seen, skeptics believed it would eventually fall apart against elite competition. They said international basketball would slow her down. They said veteran players would expose the risks in her game. They said the stage of Team USA was simply too big for someone so early in her career. Those doubts followed her everywhere. Every highlight was dissected. Every mistake was magnified. Every game became another chapter in the argument about whether Caitlin Clark was truly ready for the biggest stages in basketball. And as the moment of her Team USA debut approached, that argument reached another level. Because representing the United States in women's basketball carries enormous expectations. This program has been dominant for decades. Generations of legendary players built a reputation that borders on untouchable. When someone puts on that jersey, the standard isn't simply to compete. The standard is to dominate. So when Clark finally stepped onto the floor for her debut, the entire basketball world was watching. The first few possessions told an important story. Clark wasn't rushing. She wasn't forcing anything. Instead, she looked completely comfortable running the offense, reading the defense, and letting the game come to her. It's something people who followed her college career already understood. While her deep three-point shooting gets most of the headlines, the real engine of her game has always been her basketball IQ. She sees things developing seconds before everyone else on the floor does. That awareness was immediately visible in her debut. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Clark crossed half court, glanced at the defender in front of her, and pulled up from well beyond the arc. The shot was the kind of attempt that used to make critics shake their heads. Too deep, too risky, too confident for someone in her position. But the ball left her hands with the same smooth motion fans had seen countless times before. The crowd held its breath for a split second, and then the shot dropped clean through the net. Just like that, the arena erupted. It wasn't just the points, it was what the moment represented. Because that shot symbolized everything Clark had been hearing for months. Every doubt, every question, every comment about whether her style would survive at the highest levels. And here she was, on the international stage, playing exactly the same way she always had. Fearless, confident, unapologetically aggressive. As the game continued, the impact of Clark's presence became even clearer. Her passing started opening the floor for her teammates. Her movement without the ball forced defenders to stretch their coverage further than they wanted. And perhaps most importantly, her energy seemed to spread throughout the entire lineup. There's a certain kind of momentum that players like Clark create. When someone plays with that much confidence, it changes the rhythm of the entire team. By halftime, the narrative around the game had already shifted. Commentators who had spent months questioning Clark's readiness suddenly sounded different. Instead of discussing whether she belonged on this stage, they were talking about how naturally she seemed to fit into the system. Instead of focusing on potential weaknesses, they were highlighting the ways her skill set expanded what the team could do offensively. And fans watching around the world could sense the same thing. The debate that had surrounded Clark for so long was starting to lose its grip. But the most impressive part of the debut might have been what happened after halftime. Plenty of players start strong when adrenaline is high. The real test is how they respond when the game settles into its rhythm and the pressure continues to build. That's when Clark showed another side of her game that often gets overlooked. She didn't try to dominate every possession. She didn't force shots just to prove a point. Instead, she played within the flow of the team. picking the right moments to attack and trusting her teammates when the defense shifted its focus toward her. One possession in particular stood out. Clark drove toward the lane, drawing 2 defenders with her. For a brief moment, it looked like she might attempt a difficult layup through traffic. Instead, she fired a perfectly timed pass to a teammate cutting along the baseline. The play resulted in an easy basket, but what really caught people's attention was the decision itself. It was a reminder that Clark's greatness isn't just about scoring, it's about vision. It's about understanding how to manipulate defenses and create opportunities that other players might not even see. By the time the final minutes of the game arrived, the outcome was no longer the main story. The real story was what Clark's debut had revealed. Because the performance didn't just produce highlights, it challenged the narrative that had surrounded her for so long. The idea that her game might struggle against elite competition suddenly looked much less convincing. The belief that she needed years of development before thriving at this level began to fade. Instead, a different conversation started taking shape. People began asking whether Clark might actually accelerate the evolution of this team's offensive style. Her ability to stretch defenses with deep shooting opens space that traditional lineups rarely create. Her passing allows teammates to move more freely because they know the ball can find them from anywhere on the court. And perhaps most importantly, her presence brings an undeniable excitement that energizes both fans and players. That excitement has always been one of Clark's defining traits. Even during the most intense debates about her career, one thing was impossible to ignore. People were watching, arenas were selling out, television ratings were climbing, clips of her performances were spreading across social media within minutes. Whether someone loved her style or questioned it, they couldn't stop talking about it. That kind of attention doesn't happen by accident. It happens when a player brings something genuinely unique to the game, and that uniqueness was on full display during her Team USA debut. After the final buzzer sounded, the reaction was immediate. Analysts started breaking down the details of Clark's performance, pointing out the decisions and moments that demonstrated her readiness for this stage. Former players praised the way she balanced confidence with composure. Fans flooded social media with clips of her biggest plays. And slowly but surely, the tone of the conversation began to shift, because when someone proves themselves in a moment like this, the arguments against them start losing strength. That doesn't mean the debate around Clark will disappear completely. In sports, discussions about talent, hype, and expectations never truly end. But what her debut accomplished was something extremely important. It provided tangible evidence that the skills which made her famous in college can translate to the highest levels of competition. For Clark herself, the performance seemed to carry a quiet sense of validation. She didn't celebrate wildly after every basket. She didn't look toward the crowd searching for approval. Instead, she simply played the game the way she always has. That calm confidence might be the most revealing aspect of her personality as a player. While the world around her argues about legacy and impact, Clark appears focused on something much simpler: playing the game the right way and letting the results speak for themselves. And in this debut, the results spoke loudly. By the end of the night, it was impossible to ignore what had just happened. A player who spent months hearing doubts about her readiness had stepped onto one of the biggest stages in basketball and delivered exactly the kind of performance her supporters always believed she could produce. The shots were there, the passes were there, the leadership was there. Everything that made Caitlin Clark special showed up when the moment demanded it. Which leads to the most interesting question of all. If this was only the beginning, what might come next? Because debuts are only the first chapter of a much longer story. What truly defines great players is how they build on those early moments and turn them into lasting success. For Clark, the challenge now becomes continuing to grow within a system filled with elite talent and enormous expectations. That process won't always be smooth. There will be difficult games, tough matchups, and moments when defenses adjust in ways that force her to adapt. But if her debut showed anything, it's that Clark thrives when the stakes are highest. She has spent her entire career proving that boldness can coexist with intelligence, that creativity can thrive even in structured systems, and that confidence can inspire entire teams to play with greater freedom. Those qualities are exactly what the Team USA program has always valued. It's the same spirit that fueled generations of players who wore that jersey before her. Now Caitlin Clark is part of that tradition, and if her debut is any indication, she's ready to carry it forward. Because sometimes the biggest moments in sports don't just reveal talent, they reveal truth. They show which narratives were built on speculation and which ones were grounded in reality. For months, the story around Clark included countless doubts about whether she could handle this level of competition. But when the lights were brightest and the pressure was highest, she responded the only way great players know how. She let her game answer the question. And in doing so, Caitlin Clark's debut for Team USA didn't just create highlights, it proved everyone wrong. But if you watched closely after the game ended, something even more interesting started to happen. The conversation around Caitlin Clark didn't just quiet down, it began to shift direction entirely. For months, the discussion had been centered around whether she belonged on this stage. Now, people were asking a completely different question. What happens when a player like this fully settles into the system? Because a debut is one thing, sustaining that level of performance is another. And yet the way Clark approached the moment suggested she wasn't thinking about proving critics wrong at all. Instead, she looked like someone who had simply arrived exactly where she expected to be. That mindset is what separates great players from everyone else. When someone spends their entire career hearing that their style won't work, that their confidence is too much, that their game is too risky, it can start to affect how they play. Some athletes become cautious, others begin trying to adjust their identity just to satisfy the critics. But Clark has never been that kind of player. If anything, the criticism seems to fuel the boldness that makes her so dangerous on the court. And you could see that same mindset in the way she carried herself after the debut. There was no sense of relief, no sense that she had finally escaped the pressure. Instead, Clark spoke about the performance like it was simply another step in the journey, another opportunity to learn the system, another chance to build chemistry with teammates who have spent years dominating international basketball. That attitude is something veteran players immediately recognize. Because the truth is, Team USA isn't built on individual moments of brilliance. It's built on consistency, discipline, and a deep understanding that every player has a role. Even the biggest stars in the program's history had to learn how to balance personal talent with team chemistry. It's a process that takes time, trust, and countless hours on the practice floor. What made Clark's debut so impressive was how naturally she seemed to embrace that balance. There were moments during the game when she could have easily forced the action, moments when the crowd clearly wanted another deep three or another highlight pass. But instead of chasing those moments, she stayed patient. She moved the ball, she trusted the system, and when the opportunity appeared, she attacked without hesitation. That combination of patience and aggression is incredibly difficult to master. It's something many players spend years trying to figure out, but Clark appeared to understand it almost instinctively. That understanding is one of the reasons so many coaches believe her ceiling might be even higher than people realize, because when a player with her skill set also shows that level of decision-making, it opens the door to endless possibilities, and those possibilities extend far beyond one game. The reality is that international basketball presents challenges that are very different from what players experience in domestic leagues. The pace is different, the spacing is different, defenses communicate differently and often switch strategies much faster. Adjusting to those differences can take time, even for the most talented athletes in the world. Yet Clark looked surprisingly comfortable navigating those changes. Her ability to read defensive rotations was particularly noticeable. On several possessions, she seemed to anticipate traps and double teams before they fully developed. Instead of getting stuck or forcing a difficult shot, she calmly moved the ball to the open player. That awareness is the kind of trait coaches value deeply, because it makes the entire team more dangerous. And when a team becomes more dangerous, opponents start paying attention. After Clark's debut, you could almost imagine the scouting meetings that will take place before future matchups. Coaches studying film, defenders discussing how far they're willing to extend their coverage, entire defensive schemes being adjusted simply because one player has the ability to shoot from distances that were once considered unreasonable. That kind of impact changes the geometry of the game. Suddenly, defenders have to pick Clark up several feet farther from the basket than they normally would. That extra space stretches the defense and creates lanes that didn't exist before. Teammates can cut more aggressively. Post players can establish deeper position. The entire offense becomes more dynamic. This is exactly the kind of ripple effect that great shooters create, and it's one of the reasons Clark's arrival on Team USA could become such an important development for the program moving forward. Because while the team has always been filled with elite talent, adding a player with Clark's particular range and creativity introduces a new dimension to the attack. But beyond the tactical advantages, there's also the emotional energy she brings. Fans respond to players who play with visible passion. They respond to players who take risks, who attempt shots that make people lean forward in their seats, who create moments that are impossible to ignore. Clark has been creating those moments for years, and her debut suggested that she intends to keep doing it on the international stage as well. That energy can transform an arena. When Clark hits a deep three or threads a pass through a narrow window, the reaction isn't just applause. It's a surge of excitement that spreads through the crowd and onto the court. Teammates feel it, opponents feel it. The entire atmosphere shifts for a moment. Those moments matter more than people sometimes realize, because basketball is not just a game of skill, it's a game of momentum. A single electrifying play can ignite a run that changes the direction of an entire game. Players who consistently create those sparks become incredibly valuable, even when their contributions don't always show up in traditional statistics. Clark seems to understand that instinctively, and perhaps that's why so many younger fans feel such a strong connection to her style of play. She represents a modern approach to the game, one that blends traditional fundamentals with the kind of creativity that today's athletes have grown up watching and practicing. In many ways, her debut symbolized a bridge between generations of basketball. On one side stands the legacy of Team USA, built by decades of disciplined, dominant players who established the program as a global powerhouse. On the other side stands a new wave of athletes who are redefining what the sport can look like in the modern era. Clark sits right at that intersection. She respects the history of the game, but she also pushes its boundaries. She honors the system, but she's not afraid to innovate within it. That balance is rare, and it's one of the reasons her career has generated so much fascination. And now that fascination has reached the international stage, the truth is, one game will never completely settle the debate around a player as polarizing as Caitlin Clark. There will always be critics who believe the hype goes too far, just as there will always be supporters who believe she's only scratching the surface of what she can become. But what her debut accomplished was something incredibly important. It provided a glimpse of the future. A future where Clark is no longer simply the player people argue about on television panels or social media threads. A future where she's fully integrated into one of the most dominant basketball programs in the world. A future where her style of play becomes another weapon in a system that already knows how to win at the highest level. If that future unfolds the way many fans now believe it will, this debut might eventually be remembered as the moment when everything changed. The moment when the questions started disappearing. The moment when the conversation stopped being about whether Caitlin Clark belonged on this stage and started being about how far she might take it. Because sometimes the loudest statement an athlete can make isn't delivered in words. Sometimes it comes from a deep three-pointer that silences a room for a split second before the crowd explodes. Sometimes it comes from a perfectly timed pass that turns a difficult possession into an easy basket. And sometimes it comes from the quiet confidence of a player who has heard every doubt imaginable and simply keeps playing the game the way she always has. That's exactly what happened in Caitlin Clark's Team USA debut. And if this performance was only the beginning, then the rest of the basketball world might need to start preparing for a very different conversation in the months and years ahead.